Let's talk first, if we may, about your experience on the transition team. What exactly was your role?
I was co-leading the agency review of the Federal Communications Commission. So there were teams on the transition assigned to every part of the federal government, and our responsibility was to go into the agency, meet with the senior staff, meet with outside groups, industry, public interest groups, other interested parties, and really roll up our sleeves and assess what was happening at the agency and try to lay the groundwork for the new administration coming in to put into place both their people and a new policy agenda.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your takeaway about regarding the agency?
Well, the FCC under Kevin Martin, who was the chairman at the end of the Bush administration, was really devastated. It was a place that had been heavily politicized. The staff were demoralized. It was failing in a lot of ways to achieve the kind of benefits that it should be achieving. And so we found a lot of dissatisfaction, both inside and outside the government, with just the kinds of processes the agency was using. People would say they're just not being fair, they're not being consistent, they're not being transparent. We really don't feel like they have the interest of the American people at heart. And so we were really trying to ascertain how to revitalize this agency, how to take this agency and make it once again one that could really deliver benefits to the American people.
That sounds like quite a rebuilding job. We have one nomination for the chairman and some other positions that are still open on the commission itself. How urgent is it that we get those positions filled quickly?
Oh, I think it's very urgent. It's urgent, of course, more generally that the president's nominees get confirmed and that the additional openings are filled. The FCC is pretty important. It oversees a huge swath of the economy, the whole telecommunications and media sector, as well as the whole technology sector, which is really, I think, pretty critical to an economic recovery.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it would seem that as to the degree that the work of the FCC can be tied to the economic recovery will determine the speed with which it gets the attention it needs. How important is the role of telecommunications and technology generally in the recovery, do you think?
It's extremely important. The FCC really needs to think about itself as an economic stimulus agency, as an agency that's about creating jobs and fostering investment. And you look at the telecommunications and media and technology sectors, there's a tremendous opportunity for growth. Mm-hmm. These are not industries that are going down. These are industries that in many ways are growing, and they're the foundation for other kinds of new jobs. So revitalizing healthcare, a central part of that is computerizing medical records and putting healthcare online. That requires broadband out to every part of the country. Green energy, again, requires smart grids, instrumenting the electrical grid on broadband networks. Education requires the ability to deliver information throughout the country over networks to people. So the areas that the FCC is responsible for can really be central to the recovery.
Mm-hmm. And are you confident that the Obama administration recognizes that?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. They recognize that. Julius Genachowski, who's been nominated to be the head of the FCC, has tremendous experience as a business leader and an investor as well as in government. And I know he recognizes that, absolutely.
Okay. Now you're going to be addressing some of the challenges for communications regulation in the coming years at a seminar tomorrow. And I wonder, you're saying in this seminar that the communications networks are the foundation on which the future of of news, business interaction, entertainment, healthcare, education, energy conservation, and a lot of other economic sectors will be built, and that the network infrastructure is the dividing line between the old physical economy of scarcity and the new information economy of abundance. Tell us what you mean by these two terms, the physical economy of scarcity and the information economy of abundance.
Well, it's pretty simple. You make things, there's a necessary scarcity. GM can only put out so many cars, and it costs a certain amount of resources to build each one. But bits are bits, and they're infinitely replicable. So Google doesn't have the same kind of physical limitations on how many searches it can do or what it can do with the information that goes into its system. Now, underneath that, there are physical networks. There's equipment. They have to buy routers and servers, and they have to buy telecommunications lines to connect them up, which is why I talk about that being the dividing line. But once you have that investment, to build on top of it and to build new services and to scale them out is really limited only by the imagination.
I see. So you're also suggesting that the biggest challenge for communications law right now is to take the lessons that we've learned from some of these virtual ecosystems that live on top of this infrastructure and apply them to the infrastructure. Tell us how that works.
Well, so my research really looks at the intersection between law, business, and policy around technology. And we have 70 plus years of communications regulation in the United States that was designed for traditional networks, for the telephone system, for example, or broadcast television and radio. And increasingly, all of those are going online. They're all merging in with the internet. All those silos of networks are converging. And we don't have a regulatory structure for that new converged broadband internet infrastructure, partly because, justifiably, the FCC and other parts of the government were hesitant to regulate those new services.
Right.
As they were growing, they didn't want to apply the old rules to the new technology, which I was involved with when I was in government in the 1990s and fully support. But at some point, you need to have a system that looks at how to ensure networks are used in the public interest, how to ensure that markets don't go off the rails, which is what we saw with the financial sector, for example, and we've seen in the past with the telecom sector. And that means you need to figure out the intersection of the legal structure with the new technology, with what the market looks like today.
Right. And it seems that what you're suggesting is that the default setting in addressing regulation of the infrastructure is open access. And by open access, you mean?
So open access means that networks can interconnect freely. So what makes the internet the internet? People think the internet is a network. It's really not. The internet's a network of networks. So any system that speaks the language of standards that connects into the internet can be part of this ecosystem. And that's a principle that's allowed the internet to grow and foster so much innovation. If we have open interconnection, open access, so any broadband network system can be plugged into. You can attach new services, new devices, new applications to that network. Then there's a lot more potential for growth. So, for example, we have a stimulus package now that's going to put $7 billion into rural broadband and broadband infrastructure to expand out the system that we have in this country. If that only serves the companies that provide that network, the value is limited. But if it's an open access network, that allows other companies, governmental institutions, citizen groups to come in and leverage that infrastructure, stick a wireless network on the end, create a healthcare application in a rural community and so forth, and that magnifies the value of the network.
And are there any regulations now that stand in the way of those kinds of structures being added to the broadband network that comes into these rural areas?
Well, that's the point of this research I've been doing. It's a total regulatory gray area because the rules we have apply to traditional telecommunications networks. The FCC in the past has said broadband access networks are not what are called regulated telecommunications services. There's something else called information services,
right,
which there are no rules for information services under the existing statutes. And so what I'm trying to do in my work is map out what those rules should be by reference to some of the enduring principles that are in the Communications Act already.
The Obama administration has received some degree of attention for its consciousness of a lot of these services that you're talking about. President Obama was very worried about losing his BlackBerry, for example. Do you think that orientation is going to have a big impact on the kinds of policies that we see emerge from the FCC and other related agencies?
Oh, I think it's going to have a big impact across the government. But think about work today in any kind of organization. There are very few organizations today that don't use email, say, and that don't use the internet as just a fundamental part of how they do business, how they manage their supply chain, and so forth. So government's the same thing. And if you have people in government who are not familiar with those technologies that the average worker today and the average manager takes for granted, there's going to be a disconnect in their ability to develop policies that reflect even today's economy, let alone tomorrow's.
Okay.
So I think the fact that there are so many people involved in this administration who really are technology savvy and who get it just at a personal level is important. The other thing is these technologies are incredibly powerful. Well, I remember on the transition talking with someone who had been involved in the Clinton transition in 1992 and later was a senior official in the Commerce Department. And he said back then they had to walk around with disks. So when people would write memos or try and group collaborate on a policy recommendation, they would literally have to walk around with floppy disks across the office. And of course today we can do that all online. We had a collaboration system that we could use for doing the work of the transition. And just for the transition process, which is a limited time, it's just 77 days, which has to do a tremendous amount. The ability to use that technology was very powerful.
I see. And those powerful technologies you're talking about, right now a lot of attention is being paid to handheld instruments that really behave more like personal computers than telephones. And everybody seems to agree that's the big technology of the moment. It's very difficult to look far down the road for these things, but what are some of the other new technologies that you think that the FCC is going to have to address in the next 4 years, say?
So we're still just getting a taste of mobile. We're now in a world with about 3.5 billion people having mobile phones, which is more than double the number of people who have wireline phones. And that transition is happening, and we're just starting on the smartphone revolution. So the iPhone is really symbolic of this transition you mentioned from phones to handheld computing devices. I talked to a friend yesterday who's saying he was at Samsung. Samsung's introducing 20 iPhone-like devices next year. 20 of them for just one company. So that revolution is going to be quite significant. I think we're also going to see group collaboration mechanisms, some of the things I talked about becoming more powerful in the workplace, as well as the ability to use video much more, integrate that in, other kinds of media integrated into the process. Also just the ability to take search technology, which of course is very widespread on the internet, and apply it much more directly into lots of other services.
Okay. We've already seen social media interfere or make its presence known, I should say, in the realm of the law, where, for instance, a trial in Philadelphia in which a juror was sharing observations via Twitter. Do you see that as something that's going to be happening more and more as these social networking applications become more widely adopted, people sharing all kinds of information? Is that going to be something that is going to be looked at by regulators, do you think?
Well, first of all, I certainly think that that's something that's going to be increasingly pervasive. And Twitter is the current symbol of it, but it's really much broader than that. And it follows on from the point about mobile devices and smartphones. As you have people more and more densely connected on platforms that are interconnected and that are converged, and then you have much more intelligence both in the devices about where they are, as well as intelligence in things in terms of connecting to the devices through wireless networks and so forth, that leads to lots more potential for applications and services that leverage off of that connectivity. So Twitter is one early example, I think, of what happens when people can communicate all the time about what they're doing, and that can be aggregated together. From a regulatory standpoint, sure, there are a whole set of issues that government is just starting to wrestle with. Privacy is one that's extremely important but deeply misunderstood. It's not an either-or question of whether I'm public or private. We're going to be sharing things all the time, and people's preferences are going to be changing based on what circumstances they're in. We're in a world, and increasingly in a world, where everything is connected, so regulators and government as well as individuals need to wrestle with what are appropriate limits in terms of sharing information.
I see. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, and we look forward to your seminar tomorrow.
My pleasure.